Hello, I'm Jenny Miller, representing Cheltenham Local History Society, and today I'm talking to Lyn Morgan about her first job in banking after leaving school in 1960. Thank you, Lyn, for taking part in this project. Can we start with you giving us a little bit of background of yourself? Where did you go to school? What choices did you have for a career, and why did you choose banking?
Well, Jenny, I went to school at Westwards Grammar School in North Leach. Sadly, no longer there. It had been a school for around 400 years. It's now a little housing estate. But great school and lovely people, only about 480 pupils. So quite small, and a lot of intimate work with the teachers, which was excellent. I wasn't perhaps the best pupil they'd ever had, and I remember someone telling me, I think my geography mistress, I'd probably end up working in Woolworths. But nonetheless, my favourite subject of all was mathematics, and therefore I thought, well, maybe I could try to get into a bank. And there wasn't any sort of career advisors as such in those days, so you just talked to the teachers that you had, and I suggested it to my maths master, and he said, well, apply and see how you get on. So that's what I did.
So you applied for the job. What was the selection process like in 1960?
Well, first of all, I wrote to the local branch in Cheltenham, the High Street branch, and I got a reply from the manager, and he said he had passed my application down to local head office in Bristol. I then was asked to go down to local head office for an interview, and my dad took me down, and it consisted of a test on the spot, which I hadn't been expecting, and then an interview. And it all seemed to be fine, and I went home, didn't think anything of it. And then the day I took my first GCE, as they were in those days, I got a letter from the bank saying I had been offered a job. Very lucky.
Excellent. So where was your first job, and can you describe what it was like there? And also, I believe it was on Cheltenham High Street. So can you tell us about your memories of Cheltenham High Street?
I certainly can. At the time I lived out at Shipton Olives, I came in every day on a bus. My father worked for Perrett's Coaches, as it happened, and I also was ticket taker on the first morning bus every day. But when we arrived I worked from High Street branch originally, so the High Street then was very, very different to the way it looks today. If we started at the corner of the High Street in Cambray Place, you would find a restaurant with a huge clock on it, and it was called at the time the Clock Restaurant. It was a Chinese restaurant, which was a little unusual for the town centre in those days, and eventually I think it became the Evergreen, and was sort of very English, and dinners and things like that. But no clock anymore, just a round space where it used to be. But opposite that restaurant was the National Westminster Bank, or the National Provincial Bank as it was called then. And coming down the High Street on the same side as that, our Barclays Bank was just down the road from there, on the corner of Rodney Road. And on the opposite corner, the Lloyds Bank, which was really, I think, the biggest branch in the High Street at the time. Although opposite our office, we had a machine room upstairs, was the Lamb Hotel, and I watched that being demolished and the giant Woolworths being put up down there, which was wonderful. So from there you pop down the High Street and you have the junction of Winchcombe Street, and on the corner of Winchcombe Street there was a branch of Martin's Bank. Winchcombe Street then was very different. It was narrow and cobbled, and it was demolished. One side of it was demolished, which actually took the Martin's Bank away to make it the width it is today. The next bank down was the Midland Bank on the corner of the Promenade, And the only other bank in the town that I can remember was the Westminster Bank, which was in the promenade opposite, well, next door to the post office and opposite Cavendish House. So that's about the high street as it was.
I understand from what you said that you had an interesting coffee break arrangement in your first job. Tell us about that.
Well, we did. I mean, banks were very different then because structure was very much in place. Very strict, the rules about what you wore. We all the girls had to wear a nylon overall in the bank colours to cover their dresses up. Actually, it was a good idea because if you got onto the tills, coins are very dirty and you could get your clothes dirty on there. Hardly ever saw the manager, the assistant manager. The person that was in charge of the more junior staff was called the chief clerk, and his name was Mr. Brown, and he kept very tight control on us. If you wanted a new pen or a new pencil, you had to take your old one to Mr. Brown to see if he approved that you could have one. All the toilet paper had Barclays Bank stamped on every sheet. Very strong. But coffee was taken normally at the very top of the building in a small coffee room at a 2-ring electric cooker, and we used to boil milk on. If somebody overboiled it, there was always that smell of burnt milk. It often comes back to you. But on Saturdays we had to work, I can't remember whether it was every other Saturday or 3 out of 4, but on Saturday mornings, of course, very small staff, just the tills open, securities open, and a couple of staff at the back, and so we were only probably about 8 people. But we had a Cadena coffee shop next door, a small one, and we used to be allowed to go there for a cup of coffee, and the bank paid for our coffee on a Saturday morning. I don't know that any of the other banks did it because they were, they didn't have a Cadena nearby, but we were very lucky to have our coffee done on a Saturday morning.
Very interesting. Interesting about taking your pens to Mr. Brown to see if you could replace them. Can you tell us anything else about what it was like to work in a bank in the 1960s? What was a typical day like for you as then a very junior member of staff?
Well, in very early days, the juniors always had to do the filing and the running around and take messages from one upstairs to the machine room, and anything that needed doing, tidying up, collecting paper and taking it up to the machine room. The system in those days, without computers of course, was a waste machine, and this waste machine, every piece of cash, cheque, entry that came through the bank had to be put through this waste machine. So it was basically a day book for the entire bank. And after you sort of got through the first few months of being a junior, doing the filing and the running around, you actually got to learn to go onto this waste machine and actually input everything as it went through. The next step from there would be the machine room, which was upstairs, and when you went up there, you were responsible then for entering all the entries into the individual customers' accounts, which were then on ledger cards. And on national cash register machines, we used to have to sit there and enter a pile of cheques, piles of credits, all into these individual credit cards. And we had a supervisor, and it was very manual, really, back then in those days. Montpellier branch, for instance, which I eventually got seconded to for a couple of months, was still on handwritten books in those days. So we to have 4 machines in the machine room, we were really up to date.
Did you have any dealings with the customers? And if you did, what sort of dealings? And how did the customers respond to you as a junior bank member?
No contact with the customers, not until you had reached the hierarchy of the tills. And I suppose that was about a year or so before I actually got onto the tills. We were trained. We were sent away when I first got there in your first couple of months to London to be trained at the Barclays Bank Trading School, which was on Wimbledon Common. And there were about 10 of us, I think, on the course that I was on. And we were all billeted with senior members of the bank or older members of the bank. And I was billeted with a lovely family in Wimbledon, or in South Morden, actually. And he was a bank clerk, and they had 2 children, and there were 2 of us billeted there with him. And they looked after us very well, and we were allowed to come home once in the month we were there. They paid our train fare to come home and see our parents and go back again for the second week. So that was quite interesting. And they taught you everything, including till work. So that was quite good.
Yes, I was going to ask you what was the training all about.
Yeah.
Was there any training about how you should respond to customers?
Absolutely. Respond to customers and respond to the senior staff in your branch. Your manager is in charge of everything, and you have to show people respect. There were no first name terms for the senior staff. It was all Mr. this and Mr. that. There were no Mrs. either. It was all Misters in those days. Our lovely senior cashier and his number 2 cashier were fascinating then. And when you first went onto the till, they showed you everything. Each branch has, like anywhere, has a slightly different method, depending on where their safes are, etc., etc. But they trained us how to do the till and how to greet our customers. Our customers were always greeted by their surnames and always with the greatest respect. If they had a query of any sort that you could not answer, you went to one of the senior cashiers and you asked them to come and answer the question, and that way you started to learn. And they were wonderful, absolutely wonderful trainers.
So how long were you in the bank? When did you eventually leave the bank?
Well, I actually went to Montpellier when they were changing over from their handwritten system to their machine system, and because I obviously got on fairly well that way, I was sent up to Montpellier to help with the changeover onto the machine system. And then I got married in 1963, and I actually transferred from Cheltenham High Street to Camden Town branch. I lived at Northolt at the time, and I actually worked at Camden Town branch. They transferred me, but I had to do there every other Saturday, and it was actually almost an hour from Northolt time I got to the train and off again, and I found that quite difficult, and I didn't like the area. I didn't like the city. The people in the branch were fine with me, but I suppose I'd always been a country girl, living in a country village, living in a town like Cheltenham. And Camden Town, I didn't like at all, I'm afraid. I was a bit nervous, I suppose, at the time. I mean, I was hardly 1963, so, I was sort of 19 years old, so I wasn't used to London life. So I asked for a transfer. They transferred me to South Harrow branch, which was a lovely little branch, and it also had a sub-branch down in Northolt on the village green. And after about a year there, they sent me down to be cashier at the sub-branch. I had to go with the messenger, who stayed with me the whole time I was open. We were open from about 11 till 2 for a few hours for the people down in the village of Northolt. And we had to let ourselves in and crawl under the scan system to get to turn it off. There was only 2 tills and only ever one manned. The manager would come down for a few hours one day a week to see anybody that couldn't get up to South Harrow. And I was basically on my own as a cashier with just the messenger for company. But it was very interesting. From there I moved house, so I went to work in one more branch of Barclays and at Sudbury Hill, at the corner of Sudbury Hill High Street. And after that I started to think about maybe there was a world outside banking, so I changed and I put myself on a course with National Cash Registers, NCR, and I actually learnt the opposite to banking, because banking is always upside down to normal accounts. And I actually spent time with then I put myself into the commercial world, if you like.
Thank you very much, Lyn. The banking world is certainly very different today, and it would be interesting if you ever had to go and spend time working in a branch now.
True.
Thank you very much for sharing your memories of Cheltenham and your first job.
Gosh, that brought back a lot of memories.
That was 15 minutes, so well done.
We'll trim that.
No, it was good. It was good.